Decisions taken based on a balanced assessment of risk and information analysis. Introduction. Decision-taking is the cognitive action of selecting one out of many alternatives, the best one or the least bad one. It's coupled with a specific problem-solving or an opportunity identification and exploration. It's one of the main, never-ending activities of a manager, from the upper strategic level down to the lower everyday business level. Decision-making should be based as much as possible on rational judgment and much less on instinct, prejudice or intuition. There will always be some uncertainty in the expected results of a decision. Information analysis aims in minimizing this uncertainty. The more and better information we have, the better decision we can make. Definition of risk. Risk is usually expressed as the product of two terms, hazard multiplied by exposure. Hazard is the unwanted consequence, loss, damage, and exposure is the possibility to be affected by the hazard. Control over hazard, protection and mitigation, and exposure, prevention, should always be taken into account. Risk is connected with uncertainty and relates to every aspect of the business: financial, occupational, environmental, information technology, law practices, both internal, outlaw practices in the company, and external, crime, etc. In general, risks fall into three categories. Preventable, risk that comes from within, occupational, machinery breakdown, financial, adds no value to the business and can be prevented on a rule-based approach. Strategy, risk that is accepted based on the business strategy and the expected rewards, more benefits than cost. It's usually linked to the introduction of something new: product, process, market. External, risk that we cannot avoid, prevent, but only mitigate: terror, natural disaster, financial crisis. Risk assessment. Preventable risk can be quantified and assessed by their compliance to rules. Each organisation can easily find the appropriate set of rules and data that best suit the business and assess the exposure to risk. Risk matrices, hazard versus exposure, are common tools for this purpose. Strategy risks are harder to assess than preventable ones. R. Simmons on How Risky is Your Company? HBR categorises sources of strategy risk in three categories: growth, culture, information management, and provides a tool for assessing them. External risks are quite hard to assess. Insurance policy and sophisticated financial tools are some of the tools to cope with them. Quantification of risk. It's always better to express facts in numbers so as to compare and handle them easier. Quantification of risk is not always possible or reliable, because not all hazards can be expressed in numbers, or their value is not known, or the possibility of exposure is unknown. Risk is uncertain, and we want to reduce this uncertainty to the maximum possible extent, meanwhile being reliable. In any case, you should always avoid a risk that contains a hazard that is too big to suffer, no matter how small the exposure is. Definition of information analysis. Information analysis is a process of collecting, processing and modelling data in order to turn them into a useful form that is called information. Information is used to support rational decision-making. In the ICT era, information analysis has soared in every business sector and is a key driver for competitiveness and success. Collecting data. Data concerns facts about our activities, and it is better to be numbers, figures, so that they can be processed better. Sometimes available data are descriptive, like, for example, comments from customers. In such cases, they have to be turned into numbers through categorization and ranking. Data should be accurate, timely provided, and relevant to our problems. Data should be collected in advance and on a regular basis, although this is costly and sometimes it's not easy to know beforehand the data we may need in the future. A good starting point is to collect data based on good practices which are followed by companies relevant or similar to our business activities. Turning data to information. Statistics and visual representation. Information is the product of data processing. It answers to specific questions and motivates action or decision-taking. Data processing and information extraction varies from simple descriptive statistics up to advanced methods of automatic decision-taking. The application depends on the amount and accuracy of available data and the detail of the decisions that we must take, and there is not a recipe for success for every case. Visual presentation with spreadsheet software applications is the easiest way to extract information out of data, identify relations and facts, and can be sufficient for most business needs. Defining the alternatives. Decision-taking starts by definition of alternatives. The final decision cannot be better than the best of the alternatives identified. Define alternatives with an open mind and creative approach, focusing not only on the technical financial aspect but also on strategy and values. A set of good alternatives should consist of alternatives that are value-focused, realistic and technically financially sound, distinct and mutually exclusive, small in number, clearly and consistently defined, including the consequences and the basic actions needed for implementation, comparable, which means to have similar characteristics that facilitate comparisons. Taking a decision. For each alternative, define the criteria, e.g. profit, risk, expenses. Structure alternatives as scenarios with similar characteristics so that you can compare them. Set the maximum of risk losses that you can afford. There is a maximum that you cannot afford, the one that threatens the existence of your business, and this can be other than financial. Compare alternatives and their characteristics based on the information you have. If information is not explicit, numbers, or cannot be compared, you have to count on intuition, but in this case, apply group decision-taking in order to minimize bias. Keep some sort of documentation. Decision-making never ends. Decisions are always under consideration, and you may have to do it again. Review, modify, or even change your decision.